What if the real rulers of America never sat in the White House, but in private mansions and smoky boardrooms? Picture this: New York City, the late 1800s. Gas lamps flicker on Wall Street, carriages rattle past marble banks, and inside, men in tailored suits whisper over ledgers, their fortunes measured in oil, steel, and gold. This was the Gilded Age, a time when a handful of tycoons amassed fortunes so vast they could bend laws, buy politicians, and reshape the entire nation. John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, names that would become legends, and for many, villains. They didn't just build companies, they built empires. They turned oil into power, steel into cities, and money into influence. But their rise came at a steep price. Workers toiled in dangerous factories for pennies. Competitors were crushed without mercy. Democracy itself seemed up for sale. How did these few men turn raw materials into absolute political power? What happens when private ambition collides with the public good? We were about to pull back the curtain on the backroom bargains that changed the fate of a nation. But first, we need to understand how these titans rose and what price America paid for their empire. Let's step into the roaring furnaces of Pittsburgh, the muddy oil fields of Pennsylvania, and the bustling banks of New York. This is the crucible where America's first true tycoons were forged. Take John D. Rockefeller. He starts as a humble bookkeeper, counting pennies in a Cleveland office, but he sees opportunity in the black gold bubbling up from the ground. With a relentless, almost obsessive focus, he builds Standard Oil. He doesn't just drill for oil, he buys out his rivals, slashes prices to drive them out of business, and strikes secret, illegal deals with the railroads to get cheaper shipping rates. Soon, he controls 90% of America's oil. His empire stretches from dusty wells to gleaming refineries, a black gold octopus with tentacles in every corner of the country. Then there's Andrew Carnegie. He arrives in America as a poor Scottish immigrant, a boy working in a cotton factory. He becomes a telegraph boy, always watching, always learning, always climbing. He sees the future and bets everything on steel, the metal that will build the bridges, the railroads, and the towering skyscrapers of a new age. Carnegie's mills roar day and night, powered by constant innovation and ruthless efficiency. He cuts costs, brutally breaks strikes, and drives his workers to their limits, all in the unwavering belief that progress demands sacrifice. And finally, J.P. Morgan. He was born into wealth, but he wasn't content to simply inherit it. He becomes the undisputed master of finance. He orchestrates massive mergers, rescues failing railroads, and creates the world's first billion-dollar corporation, U.S. Steel. Morgan's word can move markets. His handshake is as powerful as any law passed in Washington. These men weren't just businessmen, they were empire builders. They perfected vertical integration, controlling every single step of production from raw material to finished product. They formed trusts and monopolies, massive corporate structures designed to crush all competition and dictate prices to the entire country. But their meteoric rise didn't go unnoticed. Enemies started to circle. Journalists gave them a new name: robber barons. Workers, tired of the exploitation, began to strike for better pay and safer conditions. And in the halls of Congress, politicians started whispering about the growing shadow of private power, a shadow that threatened to eclipse the government itself. How exactly did Rockefeller crush his rivals and corner the oil market? And why did Carnegie S. Steel simultaneously build America, S. great cities, and break the backs of its workers? As their fortunes grew, so did their ambitions and their reach into the very halls of power. The Gilded Age was in full swing. America's cities rose higher, its railroads stretched farther, and its fortunes grew fatter. But behind the marble facades and the celebratory ticker tape, a new game was being played, one where money could buy more than just mansions. Rockefeller, Carnegie, and Morgan didn't just dominate industries anymore. They began to dominate the government itself. They funded political campaigns, installing their allies in key positions. They wined and dined senators until laws were written to favor their trusts. Regulators, who were supposed to keep them in check, mysteriously looked the other way. J.P. Morgan became so powerful that in 1895, when the U.S. Treasury was on the verge of collapse and the country was about to go bankrupt, it wasn't the president who saved the nation. It was Morgan. He organized a private bailout, lending his own gold to the government and single-handedly calming the financial markets. The price for this rescue? Unprecedented influence. Morgan's word effectively became law in Washington. Meanwhile, the public was growing restless. Newspapers ran explosive exposés on secret deals and backroom bargains. Political cartoons depicted the tycoons as bloated kings, crushing the common man under their boots. The anger spilled into the streets as workers launched massive, sometimes violent strikes, demanding fair wages and basic safety. Then came the panic of 1907. Wall Street shook to its core. Banks failed, fortunes vanished overnight, and the nation teetered on the brink of another economic depression. And once again, who stepped in? J.P. Morgan. He summoned the nation's top bankers to his personal library, locked the doors, and forced them to cooperate to stop the financial collapse. He saved the economy, but in doing so, he proved beyond any doubt that a single private citizen could hold the fate of millions in his hands. The robber baron's power seemed limitless, but so did the backlash. A new wave of politicians, the populists and progressives, rose up, promising to fight back. They were called trust busters, and they had one goal: to break the grip of monopoly and return power to the people. How did Morgan manage to both save and control the U.S. Treasury? What happens when the people finally fight back against monopoly power? The battle for America's soul was about to begin. Could democracy survive the age of the robber barons, or would it be forever remade in their image? The fight was far from over. The tide begins to turn, but it doesn't start in a boardroom or a bank. It starts with a pen. A new breed of journalists, the muckrakers, begins to shine a harsh, unflinching light on the barons' empires. In the pages of McClure's magazine, Ida Tarbell meticulously dismantles the carefully constructed myth of Standard Oil, exposing John D. Rockefeller's ruthless tactics, secret deals, and predatory pricing. Her investigation, years in the making, becomes a national sensation. At the same time, a young novelist named Upton Sinclair goes undercover in Chicago's meatpacking plants. His book, The Jungle, reveals the horrifying, unsanitary, and inhumane conditions of factory life. The public isn't just angry, they're sickened. The stories of contaminated meat and exploited workers spark a firestorm of outrage. The quiet whispers of discontent become a deafening roar for reform. This public outcry echoes through the halls of power in Washington. Politicians, sensing a monumental shift in the national mood, can no longer ignore the problem. The era of laissez-faire is on its last legs. The government, once a passive observer, is about to become an active referee. The first major blow is the Sherman Antitrust Act. Passed in 1890, it's a piece of legislation designed to outlaw monopolies and any combination in restraint of trade. For years, it's a law with more bark than bite. But under presidents like Theodore Roosevelt, it becomes the government's weapon of choice. The battle moves from the marketplace to the courtroom. The government launches a series of high-profile antitrust lawsuits against the largest trusts. Lawyers and witnesses fill the courthouses as the United States takes on its own industrial giants. The most significant target is the biggest of them all, Standard Oil. After years of legal battles, the Supreme Court delivers its verdict in 1911. The decision is a bombshell. Standard Oil, the behemoth that controlled 90% of the nation's oil, is declared an illegal monopoly and ordered to be broken up. Within months, it's shattered into dozens of smaller competing companies like Exxon, Mobil, and Chevron. The age of the all-powerful, untouchable trust is over, at least for now. The robber barons, masters of reading the market, can also read the writing on the wall. Andrew Carnegie, feeling the political winds shift, decides it's time to cash out. He sells his colossal steel empire to his old rival, J.P. Morgan. Morgan, ever the consolidator, merges Carnegie Steel with his other holdings to create something the world has never seen before: U.S. Steel, the first billion-dollar corporation in history. But even Morgan's immense power is no longer absolute. The push for reform is unstoppable. Regulators and activists champion new rules for the economy. Banking reforms aim to prevent the kind of financial panics that let Morgan play savior. New labor protections are fought for. And in 1913, the Federal Reserve is created, a central bank designed to stabilize the financial system and take that power out of the hands of a single private banker. But as their Gilded Age empires begin to face checks and balances, the barons themselves begin a remarkable transformation. In their later years, these men, once derided for their cutthroat greed, become the greatest philanthropists the world has ever known. Andrew Carnegie, who once crushed unions, now dedicates his fortune to the public good. He funds the construction of over 2,500 libraries across the globe, founds Carnegie Mellon University, and builds Carnegie Hall. His gospel of wealth argued that the rich were obligated to use their fortunes to advance social progress. John D. Rockefeller, the most hated man in America, funnels his immense oil wealth into medicine, science, and education. He establishes the University of Chicago and the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, which would go on to pioneer treatments for diseases like yellow fever and meningitis. J.P. Morgan, the ultimate collector, donates his vast and priceless art collection to the public, forming the core of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Their names, once synonymous with monopoly and greed, are now etched onto the very foundations of American culture, education, and science. This raises a fascinating and deeply uncomfortable question. Did their philanthropy redeem their ruthless rise to power? Or was it simply the final, most masterful act of public relations, a way to rewrite their own history and secure their legacy? The world they left behind was undeniably transformed. Modern capitalism was born from this turbulent era, a system still driven by ambition and innovation, but now, for the first time, regulated, scrutinized, and held to account by the public and the government. But is the age of the robber barons really over, or have their methods just evolved? Picture two boardrooms, a century apart. In one, you see Rockefeller, Carnegie, and Morgan. They're in waistcoats and top hats, their fortunes built on tangible things, oil, steel, and railroads. They wield power through handshakes, secret deals, and the quiet confidence that comes from owning everything. Now, picture the other boardroom. It's filled with today's tech billionaires and financial giants. They're in hoodies, sneakers, and their weapon of choice is a smartphone. Their empires are built on the invisible, data, algorithms, and global networks. They shape our world with code, platforms, and the click of a button. Are today's titans of industry the new robber barons? The tools have changed, but the fundamental questions are startlingly similar. How much power is too much? Who truly holds the levers of democracy? Are elected leaders or private fortunes? In both eras, we see wealth accumulate at a dizzying, unprecedented speed. In both, we see a public backlash, calls for regulation, antitrust lawsuits, and heated debates over the future of work, wealth, and inequality. The battlefronts have shifted. Railroads versus data, oil versus algorithms, Gilded Age mansions versus sleek Silicon Valley campuses. But the core conflict remains. What happens when private fortunes become powerful enough to shape public life? Are we simply repeating the cycle of the Gilded Age, or are we writing a new chapter in the story of capitalism and democracy? So what is the real legacy of the men who built modern America, and at times seemed to buy our democracy? The struggle between private power and the public good is a story that is far from over. It's a dynamic tension that defines our modern world. The story of the robber barons is more than just a history lesson, it's a warning. A warning about the dangers of unchecked ambition, but also a lesson about the possibilities that can be unleashed when that ambition is channeled. Rockefeller, Carnegie, and Morgan built empires that moved the world forward, but they also tested the very limits of fairness, democracy, and trust. Their rise sparked outrage, which in turn sparked reform, forging a new vision of capitalism, one where power is meant to be balanced by law, and private fortunes are ultimately held to public account. But this cycle never truly ends. Every generation must face its own barons, its own Gilded Age, its own battles over who controls the future. Will the next democracy be bought, or will it be built by the people? Will we learn from the lessons of the past, or are we doomed to let history repeat itself just in a new, digital form? The answers are hidden in the stories of our past if you just know where to look. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more cinematic economic history and join us as we explore how the past continues to shape your future.